He worked late every night, not for money, not for glory, but for the future they promised each other. And every night she waited until she didn't. He gave everything, his time, his love, his loyalty. But what do you do when the person you trust most begins to disappear right in front of you? She lied every night, and he knew, but he said nothing, not because he was blind, but because he still believed in her. Until the night he saw it all with his own eyes. This is not a story about betrayal. It's about silence, heartbreak, and the man who stayed long after she was already gone. Have you ever loved someone so much that their dreams felt like your own? Catherine did, and so did Calvin. They weren't the kind of couple who made a big show of their love. No fancy vacations. No curated posts for attention. Just two people who had each other's backs quietly, fiercely, every single day. They had met in the company they both worked for first as colleagues, then as partners. And eventually, after years of growing together as husband and wife. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was the kind of love built from patience, late-night takeout in the office, and dreams whispered under deadlines and fluorescent lights. They believed in building a life, not just falling into one. Catherine was the heart, Calvin, the hands. He pushed forward through the grind of long hours and unreasonable expectations. She stayed behind, steady and unwavering, always ready with coffee and a look that said, "You've got this." And when life got heavy, and it often did, they didn't complain. They carried it together. But every partnership has its fault lines, and theirs was about to be tested in a way they never expected. It started subtly. Terry, the director of the company, began taking an interest in Catherine. Too much interest. It wasn't just casual conversation anymore. He started asking her to stay after meetings, offering compliments that lingered too long in the air. He'd send her messages late into the night about work, but also not really, suggesting they meet to discuss her future, but always alone. At first, she brushed it off. Catherine had always been polite, careful not to assume bad intentions. But Terry was persistent, calculated. And Calvin noticed. At first, he said nothing. He trusted Catherine. She was his everything, his anchor when the world felt too loud. But as the requests became more frequent and the late meetings started to wear on her smile, something began to shift in him. It wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. At the same time, Calvin was drowning in his own storm. His boss had grown harsher, more demanding. Overtime was no longer optional, it was expected. The pressure never let up. Targets, reviews, accusations that he wasn't hungry enough. He'd come home exhausted, emotionally wrung out, sometimes barely able to speak. And still, Catherine was there. Her presence was his only calm. But behind her kind eyes, something was shifting too. She had started coming home later. Her phone buzzed more. And sometimes, when Calvin looked at her, it was like she was present, but not really there. Still, he clung to hope, to memory, to the love they had built brick by brick, night after night. But Terry kept coming. He knew exactly how to twist situations in his favor, how to make Catherine feel seen, important, exceptional. When he praised her, it wasn't for being supportive, it was for being powerful, for standing out. He saw what Calvin didn't have time to see anymore, what stress had blurred in his tired eyes. Catherine tried to ignore it. She told herself it was harmless. She still loved Calvin. She always would. But even love can crack under enough pressure. What Terry offered wasn't just flattery, it was escape. From the routine, from always waiting, from being the one who holds everything together while no one asks how she feels. And when someone offers you the illusion of being chosen, it's hard not to wonder, what if? That wondering would soon become a path she could never walk back from. And Calvin, he still believed they were okay, even when they weren't. Love doesn't always disappear in a loud crash. Sometimes it fades in silence while you're too busy trying to survive to notice it slipping away. Calvin was working later than ever. Overtime had become the norm, not the exception. The deadlines kept tightening, the expectations kept rising, and the man he once was hopeful, driven, light in his eyes, was now often just a shell hunched over spreadsheets and code, running on caffeine and the echo of dreams he barely remembered chasing. And Catherine, she waited. Night after night, she'd sit in their quiet apartment, scrolling through old photos on her phone, ones where they looked happy, genuine, unscripted. She would replay voice notes Calvin used to leave her, little reminders like, "Don't forget lunch, love you," back when time still felt like it belonged to them. But lately, time belonged to someone else. That night, like many before it, Calvin stayed late. The office lights buzzed above him. The clock ticked past 11. Everyone else had gone home. But he was still typing, still chasing approval that never came. Catherine was alone again, but not for long. Terry showed up. He didn't knock like a stranger. He arrived like someone who knew the door would open, with a bottle of wine, a silk-smooth smile, and questions that sounded like concern but felt like strategy. "You look tired," he said, brushing a hair behind her ear. "You always give so much of yourself. Doesn't anyone ever take care of you?" It was such a simple sentence, but it landed like thunder. Catherine didn't answer right away. She looked away, gripped the edge of the sofa. She still wore her wedding ring, but something in her heart was trembling, confused, tired of waiting. He kept talking about her potential, about the things she could have, the life she deserved. He made her laugh. Then he made her feel. And that was the most dangerous part. She didn't love Terry, but he didn't ask her to wait. She started seeing him, first in secret meetings that felt like business. Then coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into dinners that ended with soft touches and guilt she buried under justifications. At first, she followed Calvin, not because she didn't trust him, but because she did. She still believed in him. She needed to see the man who once held her hand like it was his anchor. She waited for him outside the office some nights, hoping he'd finish early, hoping something would bring him back to her. But he never did, so she stopped waiting and started falling. It was a slow descent, one wrapped in whispered promises and stolen moments. Terry didn't ask her to be strong. He didn't expect her to carry the weight of someone else's struggle. With him, she could be vulnerable, soft, wanted. Yet every time she came home, Guilt trailed behind her like a shadow. Calvin would be asleep on the couch, his laptop still glowing, his face lined with exhaustion. She would stare at him and wonder, when did we start living separate lives under the same roof? But she couldn't stop. She didn't know how. Terry became her escape, her mirror, her sin, and Calvin. He was drowning, and he didn't even know what hit him. Until one evening, Calvin, by some miracle, finished early. For once, he beat the clock, beat the wait. He stopped at a flower stall on the way home, thought maybe, just maybe, it was time to find each other again. He walked through their door heart, full of hope, and found silence. No Catherine. A message on the table. Over time. Don't wait up. But something in his chest twisted. An ache. A knowing. So he turned around and went back to the office. The parking lot was half empty. The hallway lights flickered. He walked slowly, like every step knew more than he did. Past the elevators, past his own desk, and then he saw them. Through the half-closed blinds of the conference room, Catherine, Terry. Close, too close. Her smile, the one he thought was his, resting on another man's lips. And just like that, everything broke. But he didn't make a sound. He turned and walked away. Because some heartbreaks don't scream. They just shatter quietly. Some heartbreaks don't scream. They just quietly tear you apart. That night, Calvin sat alone in the dark. He'd seen everything his wife, the woman he built a life with, wrapped in another man's arms. And not just any man, Terry, the same man who smiled at him in meetings, the one who slowly crept into their lives like a shadow. But Calvin didn't say a word. He didn't confront her. He just waited. When Catherine came home, she lied again, said she was working late, kissed his cheek, pretended, and Calvin played along. Not because he believed her, but because he wasn't ready to let go. He still hoped somewhere deep down that she'd remember who they were, what they had, and come back on her own. But she didn't stop. She kept seeing Terry, and the guilt that once haunted her, it faded, slowly. She smiled less at Calvin. Her stories grew shorter. Her phone never left her hand. Yet Calvin never said anything. He just broke quietly, little by little, every time she looked at him with eyes full of lies. Terry grew more possessive, more demanding. What once felt like escape now felt like control. Catherine started to see the cracks, but she was already in too deep. And Calvin? He tried to hold on to whatever was left, cooking her favorite meals, asking about her day, reaching for her hand across the couch. But every time he touched her, it felt like reaching for someone who had already left. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of being second to a man who didn't love her, just wanted to own her. And as the silence between them grew louder, Calvin knew she wasn't coming back, and maybe she never really planned to. Calvin couldn't pretend anymore. He had seen it all, her lies, her betrayal, and still he stayed, hoping she'd come back. But night after night, she returned home with excuses and the scent of someone else on her skin. He waited in silence, not because he didn't care, but because he still did. One night, he finally spoke. "I know," he said softly. She froze. "I've known for a while," he continued. I just hoped you'd stop before I lost you completely. There were no tears, no confessions, just silence. That silence told him everything. So Calvin let go, not with anger, not with blame, but with love. Love for what they had, and love for himself. He walked away from the woman he once waited for every night. Because sometimes the hardest kind of love is knowing when to leave. Have you ever loved someone so much that letting go felt like tearing your soul in half? If you have, you're not alone. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's knowing when to walk away. If this story moved you, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. Thanks for watching.